Hey friend, welcome to Meadow Homestead. My name's Melissa if you're new here, and I hope that you subscribe and stay with us as we go through our adventures this year and with gardening and homemaking. And today on this very, very blustery, wintry day, we're going to make some sourdough. And this is one of my favorite things to do because it's just so easy. And we're going to start with 200 grams of sourdough starter, and I mill all of my grain fresh milled if I can. Sometimes I will add all-purpose flour, as you'll see later in this video that sometimes you just have to add that, but I really love the taste and smell of fresh milled flour. And here I'm going to mill some hard red wheat. We're going to do about 600 grams of whole wheat and 400 grams of all-purpose flour. Now, really with this recipe that I use, my ratios vary. Sometimes I'll do a 50-50, sometimes a 60-40. It all depends on how I'm feeling that day. So we're going to go ahead and let this get all milled, and we'll prep the rest of our ingredients. To the sourdough starter, we're going to add about 700 grams of water. And here you'll see I'm adding my all-purpose flour. You want to get pretty close to your measurements, but if you go a little bit under or over, it's not bad. I do love using my scale because it gets me right exactly where I need to be each and every time and produces consistent results. This is one of my favorite kitchen tools. It's a Danish dough whisk. It makes mixing so easy. And so I'm just going to get in here and mix up this dough. You just want a shaggy dough. It doesn't have to be perfect. As we are going to do some stretching and folding over the next few hours. We're going to go ahead and let this sit for about an hour. Sometimes I go a little bit shorter or longer depending on what I'm doing that day. And while we're at it, we're going to go ahead and get our sourdough starter fed. Now, sometimes I'll do 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. Sometimes I do 50-50. It all depends on how much starter I have in my container. And I like to reuse, we use Adam's peanut butter, and so I just keep all of those glass jars and I repurpose them for multiple different things. Sourdough starter is one of them. Now you want to make sure the water that you use is filtered. You don't want something that's heavily chlorinated, as it will kill your starter. And you're just going to mix it in really well. I try to make sure that I scrape the edges of my container so that it doesn't dry out. And it also gives me a reference later to see how much my starter has risen or if it's starting to fall back down, and just to keep things clean. I just lightly place the lid on top so that I can still get a little bit of air. So here you can see we have gotten almost 2 feet of snow in a matter of days, which for February is pretty typical. It just leads to a lot of cleaning up of snow blowing, and all the sorts. We're going to go ahead and take care of the animals at the farm while that sourdough is sitting for a little bit. And we've got some bedding that we purchased, and we're going to go ahead and stick that here in the coop, along with some feed and water. Now, we did get water to our property this year. However, the last spigot that we put in, it was too cold when we buried that spigot, and so it started to leak. We think it froze as we were trying to close that trench up. But as you can see, I'm 5'5", and you can see how much snow we've gotten this year so far. We get a lot of snow. All right, so let's talk about this chicken coop setup. Chicken coop itself is wonderful. My husband put in a wall on the inside to basically split it in half. The front half is where we store things. The back half is where the chickens are at and where they roost. For the actual run part, we bought this cheap, I guess it's a dog kennel off of Amazon, and we thought that it would do fine until we could have the time this year in 2025 to build a bigger, more permanent run. And as you can see, it's slowly falling apart with the weight of the snow. So we've just made do as much as possible, and we try to keep it shoveled off so that they have a place. We have a place covered for the chickens to be out in the run. But it gives us a lot to reflect on what we want to do for their permanent run this coming year. And we'll bring you along as we go ahead and build that this spring. As you can see here, I'm filling up their water. We've got their water is there in the other corner on top of a heated base and underneath a covering so that they can easily get to it. We keep their feed in the coop just so that moisture doesn't get into that feeder and cause it to freeze. We have run into that this year. So here you can see I'm filling up their feeder within the coop and making sure everything's kind of organized and tidied up. Now, we've been getting about 14 to 18 eggs a day, and we get some really big eggs sometimes, but they're beautiful eggs. And so I'm just going ahead and putting eggs in a carton here that we're reusing. We have some customers that like to buy some eggs from us, and so we just make sure we keep some for ourselves, and then we have our weekly pickup once a week. So here you can see I'm adding about 30 grams of water to 20 grams of salt, and this will be our first stretch and fold process. We'll mix the salt in with the water, and then we're going to dump it into our big bowl that has our sourdough bread start, and then we're going to do our first stretch and fold. Now, the first stretch and fold, it's going to be just trying to incorporate that salty water as best we can, because as you can see, there's not a whole lot of gluten structure that's happening yet. Once we're done stretching and folding, we're going to let this sit for about 2 hours, give or take, depending on what you've got going on. Sourdough is very forgiving. Don't let it scare you. A lot of people think that it's so hard and it has to be so structured, but really, I don't ever really follow the same process every time. And you just want to make sure you get those stretches and folds in a couple of times and you'll be fine. So here we are after 2 hours or so. We're doing our next set of stretch and fold, and you'll notice that I've gotten my hands wet. Now, getting your hands wet helps the dough not stick to your hands while you're trying to do this stretch and fold process. So anytime that you do a stretch and fold, I recommend getting your hands wet, and it'll definitely help. Now we're going to let this sit for another 2 hours, and then we're going to come back and we're going to flour our surface, and we're going to get this dough ready to be shaped into a banneton. Now, what we want to do is we're going to roughly eyeball what half looks like, and we're going to split this dough in half, and then we're going to do our last set of stretches and folds. Now, basically what you're looking for is to stretch and fold into a very tight ball, or you're just adding, pressure to the dough so that it's nice and tight and taut, and Then we're going to let it rest for 1 more hour. Sometimes I'll do just half an hour, again, depending on what my schedule is looking like. All right, so we're coming back, and now we're going to get our bannetons ready to receive this dough, and we're going to get the dough in here. And as you can see, I've got a banneton that is oval shaped, and then you'll see I'll have a banneton that is circular shaped. I got these as a set, and I really like the difference between the two. It gives you options when you're slicing up your bread. And so what I want to do is take my dough here, and we're going to stretch it out, and we're going to fold in the sides and then roll it up like a hot dog. And this just gives it a nice shape, and making sure it's just nice and tight. We're going to pinch in that underside, and we're going to put it right side down. And you'll see when we go to bake it why we do that, because we're going to flip it over. So here we're going to prepare our circular one, and same process with making the dough nice and tight. We're not going to roll it up, but we're going to do some stretching and folding until we have that dough nice and tight into a ball, basically. Now that we have these in our banneton, we're going to stick them in the fridge and cover them with that towel overnight. Now, here we are the next morning, and actually we're pretty close to noon, I think, at this point. And we're going to set our oven at 450 and put our Dutch oven in there to warm up with the oven. And here we have our blade so that we can score that dough. And I'm just going to flour the surface. Now, typically I will put parchment paper down and score my bread on that, and then I'll just transfer the score the dough. I'll transfer the dough on the parchment paper right into the Dutch oven. However, I found out that I was out of parchment paper this day, so I put it directly in my Dutch oven, and it turned out just fine. Now, when it comes to scoring your bread, you can find all kinds of patterns on Pinterest, but I like to keep it simple unless I'm feeling creative that day. So we're just doing a nice score along the side for releasing of the air in the dough. And then I just put a nice wheat design on the top. Now our oven is nice and hot at 450 degrees, so we're going to transfer that dough right into the Dutch oven. And then we're going to put the lid on. And what this does is it creates a moist environment while that dough is cooking for the first 30 minutes. Once 30 minutes is up, we're going to take this lid off of the Dutch oven. We're going to decrease the temperature in the oven to 350, and we're going to bake it for about 15 minutes more. Once it's done, it's ready to come out. And look how beautiful that is. It's one of my favorites, and then the house smells so great. So here we have our second one. We're going to go ahead and score this one. I decided to try something a little different just to be fun. And we'll get this scored up, and then we'll start that process all over again. Now, I think I forgot to mention, when I first started doing sourdough, I followed the seasonal Homestead recipe, and that's what I still loosely follow today. And so I'll link that down below. But look how gorgeous these turned out.